suburban eastern Australia, an environment that has, over time, evolved some extraordinarily unique groups of Homo sapiens. But today, we observe a small tribe akin to a group of meerkats that gather together atop a small mound to watch, question, and discuss the current events of their city, their country, and their world at large. Let's listen keenly and observe this group fondly known as the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Yes, hello and welcome back, dear listener. The Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove podcast, where we talk about news and politics and sex and religion. I'm Trevor, aka the Iron Fist, coming in loud and clear from regional Queensland. Scott the Velvet Glove. How are you, Scott?
Good, thanks, Trevor. G'day, Joe. G'day, Trevor. G'day, listeners. I hope everyone's well.
And coming in loud and clear from Peter Dutton's electorate, Joe the Tech Guy.
Evening all.
Yes. In the chat room, John's there to say hi. If you're in the chat room, say hello. We will try and incorporate your comments, and we're going to talk about what's happened around the world in the last 7 days. And a lot of it's going to be taken up with the ICC and their decision of their prosecutor to call for arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister and one of his other ministers. And just the reaction of people to that is, it's quite revealing, I think. So, Scott, you've had a busy week and you haven't had a chance to read a lot, but have you kept up with any of that stuff at all?
Yeah, I have. And I think to myself that I think a lot of what the news media is missing is they're missing that they're not only indicted 2 Israelis, they've also called for the arrest of 3 Palestinians.
Yes.
You know, and that is what I think has been lost on all this, because Israel has overreacted. I've got no doubt about that. But they did have cause to react, considering they had a hell of a lot of people were murdered and that type of thing and raped, and then 1,300 of them were taken hostage.
We'll get onto that. Okay, that's coming up. There's a lot that we can talk about with that. So yeah, that'll take up a fair bit of it. Who knows? Scott, have you got to go to bed early again?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, we might keep going after you go to bed because there's a lot on the list here and there's a bit of a risk that some of it will start to get old and stale. So we'll see how we go. Hang in there. I mean, last week I said we are going to talk about Taiwanese democracy and we never even got to it. So I should try and get to that today, perhaps before Scott leaves. So anyway, let's kick off, as we try to do regularly, is what are we grateful for? And I would say, there's been a lot of stuff that I've been looking at in the non-mainstream news sources, such as Twitter, such as the John Menadue blog, such as other independent sort of media places, and getting lots of really good stuff. And, okay, sometimes you look at it and you think, can I trust this source? And you Google and you find that, yes, these things are reported in other places, so it's more likely true. And so Twitter, dear listener, I never really did much with it. I don't post anything. I just read. You can create what's called Twitter lists, where you basically put in a list the people you want to see their comments in that list. You don't get any of the other rubbish. You just get the stuff that you want in that list. And I reckon it works quite well. I can bookmark it easily. So I'm grateful for Twitter lists, and I'm also grateful for my RSS feed reader, because there's been a lot of stuff that I've been finding in independent blogs that I can quickly bookmark and read later. And dear listener, if you've signed up for the newsletter, which you get 3 times a week, there's been heaps and heaps of articles have been put on that. So in the show notes, look for the link for the newsletter, and as I find these things, you can just get the email newsletter and read them yourself if you want to. Yeah. Scott, have you signed up for the newsletter?
No,
you don't have to now because you're getting the Word document, so you're getting it anyway.
I'm getting the Word document, yeah.
Yeah. Are you grateful for anything, Scott?
You
don't have to be.
I'm grateful for the Catholic Church for giving me a job for 12 months.
Yes.
You know, it's not too bad. It's a great job and everything else. I've just got to keep with it and that type of thing.
Yes.
I'm also grateful for the. I know that you do have some criticism of the ABC and the Australian news media, but I think they have actually turned the corner. They are seeming to report a little bit more on what's actually happening in Rafah right now.
Yeah.
You know, it's only just a little bit, but they have actually reported on it, and they've actually said that. There's a report on the ABC today. I was reading that they were saying that Israel has launched airstrikes on Rafah and 35 already dead in the opening salvos of that.
Mm.
So, it seems to be turning just a little bit.
Did they explain that Rafah was the place they told these people to go to be safe, and then
They
started bombing the tents they were in?
They said that there were 1 million or more people hiding down there. So I assume that they understood that their readers would understand that that was where the Israelis told them to go.
I'd have to say that between John Menadue blog, Crikey, Twitter, Caitlin Johnston, The Cradle.
Oh,
We've lost him.
yes.
He's been shut up. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I do read those things that he's talking about. He was talking about the John Menadue blog and that type of thing. I do read that, but the ABC seems to have lifted its game just a little bit. They're still not as good as the John Menadue blog is, but it's not too bad. And I do read a fair bit on Crikey, but I haven't read it in a couple of days, so I couldn't tell you. Anyway, that's just one of those things. I did go and see Golda in the cinema the other day. That was very good. And yeah, that's about it. I think that that's probably the last time the Israeli Prime Minister had any sort of self-respect or respect from the rest of the world, because she was actually a decent individual that tried to do the right thing but couldn't actually convince the rest of them to do it.
No, we can't hear you, but you're on mute.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you now.
That was crazy. It just went bang and made a terrible noise, but I'm back. There we go. So I could catch a little bit of what you were saying about John Menadue, but anyway, so between all those sources, dozens and dozens of interesting things to read, and I would tune to ABC and The Guardian and find nothing. It was very lightweight, it seemed to me. So, yeah. Joe, did you have anything that you're grateful for?
You mean other than shiny new toys?
Yes. So, no, nothing else?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head, no.
Right.
I
okay.
haven't sat down and considered it.
Right. Okay. All right, dear listener. Well, we will get into the stories. And in the chat room, John says it was now your chance for a takeover, Joe, as my audio failed there. What else we got? And John says, sadly, I have trouble keeping up with your emails. Okay, there's a lot there. I get that. So, all right. Gaza. So, before we get into the ICC, Caitlin Johnson says US intelligence estimates that Israel has only killed 30 to 35% of Hamas fighters in Gaza. And Scott, the whole idea of going into Rafah was supposedly to clear out the remaining Hamas fighters.
Yeah, well,
but that's just impossible.
Not possible. Yeah, because you got them living amongst the civilian population. You can't liquidate them with airstrikes. You're not going to be able to do that.
Yep.
Which means you've got to actually put boots on the ground. You've got to send them in there, and we've seen the way the Israeli boots on the ground behave. So I don't think they're going to be able to eliminate any civilian casualties because they clearly know that they're just going to shoot them.
It's impossible to just pick off what are Hamas fighters
because they don't wear a uniform
and leave non-Hamas alone. And at the same time, by virtue of their actions, they're creating more Hamas fighters.
Absolutely,
because people who might previously have been neutral. So she points out that Israel has come nowhere remotely close to accomplishing its stated goals in Israel. So, And she says either they must inflict much, much more horror upon Gaza or revise their official goals. And she says, of course, there's option C, which is that Israel has been lying about its stated goals of getting rid of Hamas and is actually accomplishing exactly what it set out to accomplish, which is,
Liquidate the Palestinians.
yes, out of Gaza and to take even further control of it. So I think that's sort of what their intention was. Part of that is I've been reading a book, 10 Myths About Israel, Ilan Pappé, and he's an Israeli historian, political scientist, former politician, professor with the College of Social Sciences and International Studies at the University of Exeter. He's a historian. And, okay, he's a controversial one and not everyone agrees with him, and his writings are not orthodox. So he's one of Israel's new historians. And he has, since the release of pertinent British and Israeli government documents in the 1980s, offered an unconventional view of Israel's establishment in 1948 and the exodus of 700,000 Palestinians. Anyway, in his book, which I'm sort of 2/3 of the way through, and this is, a controversial historian, but he provides a compelling argument when he's referring to various documents. In order to reevaluate the 1967 war, we need to first go back to the war of 1948. The Israeli political and military elite regarded the 1948 war as a missed opportunity, a historical moment in which Israel could and should have occupied the whole of historic Palestine from River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, and the only reason they didn't do so was because of an agreement they had with Jordan. And he says we can see from the takeover of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip represents a completion of the job that began in 1948. Back then, the Zionist movement took over 80% of the Palestine. In 1967, they completed the takeover. He sort of paints a picture in his book of regret by military and political elite that they didn't use the opportunity to take more land and just be done with it. And it would not surprise me if there was a large element in the Israeli elite that were, if ever we get a half-decent sort of retaliation from Gaza, then we just go all out and just completely wipe out Gaza in response.
I think that's what Likud and his right-wing allies want.
Yeah.
Because they certainly, Biden told them not to invade Rafah. They've ignored him and just crushed Rafah.
Mm.
And it's just one of those things. I just think to myself that Netanyahu is trying to extend the war as long as he possibly can because he knows there can't be an election while they're at war. And he will actually lose the election once it's called. And also, I just, what was the word I was groping for? It's, you hear those right-wing lunatics from his war cabinet and that sort of stuff, and they keep saying, we've got to keep prosecuting this war.
Mm.
None of them, and, the one thing they refuse to discuss is what actually happens once the shooting stops. Because they've actually got to release those plans about what they plan on doing with it. But they're not actually prepared to tell the world what they're going to do with it because they know it would be unjust and incredibly cruel.
Yes.
They want to develop the waterfront plan, the waterfront land.
Yeah, I know. That was the dickhead.
For Jared Kushner.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Jared Kushner.
Yeah. So anyway, we've had in the past the International Court of Justice received documents from South Africa asking for the court to sort of consider Israel as committing genocide. And just recently, we've had the International Criminal Court have been involved via their prosecutor who's applied for the arrest warrants to be issued for Netanyahu and I think the defence minister, and then the leaders of the Hamas, 3 of the leaders of the Hamas militant group. So worth just talking about well, what's the difference between the ICJ, International Court of Justice, and the ICC, International Criminal Court? So the ICJ is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. It was established in 1945, consists of 15 judges elected by the UN General Assembly. On the other hand, the ICC, which is the one that's been in the news recently with this sort of warrants for Netanyahu, that was established in 2001. It's an independent international organisation created by a treaty called the Rome Statute. And basically for countries to be bound by it, they have to have signed up to the Rome Statute. So the International Court of Justice is more about dealing with countries and states as to whether they've committed war crimes. The ICC is more about individuals and whether those individuals have committed war crimes. So ICC doesn't have a police force, but state parties, so parties who have signed up to that treaty that I just mentioned, the Rome Statute, are obliged to comply with a requested arrest warrant. So even though they don't have a police force, if the ICC says, we've got a warrant for the arrest of Netanyahu, and if you are a country, say, Germany, and Netanyahu arrives at your international airport, you're supposed to arrest him. That's part of the deal of signing up to the statute.
Is Israel signed up to the Rome Statute or not?
No, we'll get on to that. Well, effectively, no. Israel did not sign up to it, and the US, China, and Russia have not signed up to it. But Palestine has. And the ICC claims jurisdiction because the war crimes alleged against Netanyahu are against a people who have signed up to it, namely the Palestinians. So now, there might be some legal arguments about that. Because the ICC's jurisdiction covers crimes committed in the territory of one of the 124 member states. Maybe there's some argument that Gaza is not the territory of Palestine. But apparently there's been a previous case where they said it would be. So it's looking more likely that they do have jurisdiction. And the question will now be whether these various member states, which do not include USA, China, Russia or Israel, whether they would well, I don't think Netanyahu is going to travel to any country that declares they're going to arrest him. So his movements, he's a little bit like Putin now. He can't move. He's got to be careful where he goes to.
Well, I mean, is South Africa signed up to the ICC or not?
I'm sure they would have.
Well, that just goes to show the hypocrisy because they've already said that if Vladimir Putin travels to South Africa, they're not going to arrest him.
Oh, did they? Yeah, maybe they did too. Yeah. You're right. If they did say that, that would be another hypocritical move.
Yeah.
So I'm just imagining South Africa has, but I'd be surprised if they haven't. But that does ring a bell, actually, Scott, that they said something like that. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of hypocrisy that we're going to be covering in this whole fiasco.
Yeah. There's more than enough hypocrisy to go around.
Yes. So anyway, the prosecutor for the ICC, he's got the authority to launch an investigation on his own initiative, and that's what this guy's done on this occasion. So this is going to bring about a whole lot of discussion about the international rules-based order as opposed to international law. And you'll hear the phrase used a lot in relation to this. And, international law is stuff like hard and fast law that's been made and compliance with international bodies, kind of like the ICC and the ICJ and things like the international law of the sea. That's the sort of stuff that I would call international law. And the international rules-based order is a far more nebulous concept, which comes in quite handy if you want to be a little bit picky and choosy about how you apply the law. So, dear listener, in episode 348, we talked a bit about this idea of the international rules-based order, and it's this nebulous topic. This article was by Mike Scrafton in the John Menergy blog that I'm going to be reading from, and he says if there are rules other than the international law norms set out in treaties or determined by authorised arbitrational institutions, what are they? Who sets them? And what is the obligation to comply? So it's a phrase commonly used by Americans when they're angry with Russians and Chinese and other anti-Western forces to say that they're just not complying with the international rules-based order. But of course, when the USA threatens to arrest anyone in the ICC who dare to arrest Netanyahu, they don't consider themselves to be breaching the international rules-based order. So as a term, it didn't exist until around 2010. And Australia was one of the ones behind it, actually. I think Kevin Rudd was a big one for using the term and may have even invented it. So our 2009 Defence White Paper made 11 references to rules-based order and only 2 references to international law. And 7 years later, the 2016 White Paper, there were 59 mentions of rule-based global order, and international law was only used 9 times. So in this article, he says the shift from international law as a phrase to rules-based order is a rational one on America's part because international law holds equality of states as a key principle and denies American exceptionalism and homogeny, whereas the rules-based order kind of implies let's just keep everything the way they are, which is what you do when you're a hegemon. So, so that's just a bit of a riff on whenever I hear international rules-based order or I just cringe a little bit. I mentioned last week about Sam Harris and my disappointment with him on this whole issue, and he was one to talk about international rules-based order, and I thought, Sam Harris, you are not reading widely enough on this topic, so it annoys me when I hear it. Do you squirm at all when you hear international rules-based order, Joe or Scott, or you don't care when you hear it? It's just water off a duck's back?
It's probably just water off a duck's back with me. You know, I've heard it so often that, you know, I never equated it to, I never actually knew that there was a hell of a difference between that and the international law.
Right.
But now that you've explained the differences, I will listen out to it a little more attentively.
I just find it amusing that America lectured the rest of the world on colonialism.
Yes.
And now is being a colonial power, a fading colonial power.
Yes.
You know, what I found extraordinarily hypocritical about the United States was not just their actions and everything else that we've gone over and over again about in South America, but how they drove around the world telling the British they had to dismantle their empire.
Mm.
But when it came to the French and that sort of stuff, when Ho Chi Minh went over to actually see them and said, well, all we want is your help to get rid of the French, they said, oh, we can't do that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. Incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
Let's look at some of the reactions to the work of the prosecutor calling for arrest warrants for Netanyahu and I think it was the defence minister.
Yeah, but his name is...
I'll have his name here somewhere, but...
Gant, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. So let's go to the first clip I've got here. This is Lindsey Graham. What's Lindsey Graham's title? Scott, what's his? Let me just see. Speaker of the House, the U.S. Speaker of the House.
That's
No, that's not Lindsey Graham. That's a different guy. I've got Lindsey Graham here. He's a senator, I think, Republican
United
senator.
States Senator.
Yes. I'll do him first, and then I'll go back to the Speaker of the House. So here he is.
So we hope.
By the way, he's speaking, and you'll hear laughter, and that's not from other members of the Senate. It's from protesters who were at this particular hearing.
Together, we'll find a way to register our displeasure with the ICC, because if they'll do this to Israel, we're next. This group tried to come after our soldiers. Yeah, you can clap all you want to. They tried to come after our soldiers in Afghanistan, but reason prevailed. So at the end of the day here, what I hope to happen is that we level sanctions against the ICC for this outrage to not only help our friends in Israel, but protect ourselves over time. Mr. Secretary, your statement yesterday was excellent. The President's statement was excellent. Senator Schumer's statement on the floor was excellent about the outrage here. They have destroyed the notion of complementarity. They have misled people in the United States Senate about their intention, and they shall and will pay a price. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate what you've said. It is now time for us to act. Thank you.
I like that bit where he said, if they can do this to Israel, they can do it to us. And the protesters started clapping and going, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, if your soldiers commit war crimes, why not?
Exactly. Okay, got one from the Speaker of the House here.
He's that Christian nut job.
Yeah, Christian nut job, yeah. That doesn't narrow it down much, Scott, but he is.
No,
one
I know
of
that. Anyway.
Yes, yeah. One of the Christian nut jobs. Speaker of the House, here he is.
America should punish the ICC and put Karim Khan back in his place. And if the ICC is allowed to threaten Israel's leaders, we know that America will be next. There is a reason that we've never endorsed the International Criminal Court, because it is a direct affront to our own sovereignty. We don't put any international body among or above American sovereignty, and Israel doesn't do that either. Congress is reviewing all of our options right now. We have some very aggressive legislation that we're going to push as quickly as possible. It will impose sanctions, and if the ICC moves forward with its absurd warrant arrest or request, this is going to be an even bigger international problem.
What can they do?
Well, they can try. It's like a criminal trial, and I'll get onto the charges against Netanyahu, but one of the charges is of starving the Palestinians in Gaza.
Yeah.
It's a war crime. And he can raise a defence. Like, it's a trial. It's the prosecutor saying there's a plausible case here that Netanyahu has committed these crimes. I want him before our court and we'll run a trial. So it's not like the ICC has said he's guilty.
Mm-hmm.
They've simply charged and said he should come before the court and explain himself, and he'll have a chance to defend himself like any other person in a criminal trial. These goddamn hypocritical Americans are just like, for a start, you'd think it was Biden who was being brought before the ICC. It's an ally who's clearly committed some dodgy, horrendous stuff, and whose defence minister and other ministers have said horrible things about wiping out the Palestinians. And these guys, with their outrage that they should be, that the ICC should think that it might actually do this, they're just appalled. They're honestly, I don't think they're putting it on. They are shocked that somebody would...
That these uppity colonials...
uppity brown people...
Yeah.
...would do this.
I mean, he's Khan for a start, so he's not a white person.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the other one we've got here, this is... find another video here. This is, how they have these spokespeople, which I find really strange in the whole American system where rather than the actual politician talking, you get these spokespeople who deal with the media. But there's a bit more toing and froing between the media pack and these spokespeople as they talk about various issues. So have a listen to this one. Yeah.
I was kind of momentarily stunned by your original answers. I forgot my question, but these will be brief. So are you okay then with the application for arrest warrants against Hamas?
We do not believe that they have jurisdiction over either of the parties of this
So
conflict,
you don't think
and that
that
includes Hamas.
You don't think that Hamas leaders should be prosecuted?
We absolutely believe that Hamas should be held accountable. That could be
Held
hold on.
accountable.
Let me
Okay.
finish. That could be either through the prosecution of the war effort by Israel. It could be
In other words,
hold
them
on.
being killed?
It could be by being killed. It could be by being brought to justice in an Israeli court. We do not believe the ICC has jurisdiction over either of the parties in this case because the Palestinian people do not represent a state.
Okay.
That includes the leaders of Hamas.
But obviously the administration is also troubled by actions that Israel has taken post October 7th. So where is the accountability for that? Where do the Palestinians go? This is a question I asked Ned a long time ago, over and over and over again. Where do the Palestinians go to seek redress?
So let me answer this a couple of different ways. First of all, in the short term, with respect to questions of war crimes, Israel does have open investigations, a number of open investigations. We made this public when we released our report on National Security Memo 20, including some investigations that have become criminal investigations into conduct by members of the IDF. That is the first instance for judging whether someone has committed a war crime or a violation of IDF code of conduct. That's one of the reasons why we have concerns about the ICC. The ICC is set up to be a court of last resort. If a country isn't properly holding itself and its personnel accountable, that's when the ICC comes in, not in the middle of the process as they have done here. That said, ultimately, and you know this, Matt, because we've spoken about it a lot, we believe that there should be the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. And an independent Palestinian state would have the ability to join the Rome Statute and become a member of the international.
Actually, I'm just going to interrupt because he talked there
exists.
about how it should be of last resort. But that would only be if Israel was conducting inquiries into war crimes by its people, and they're not. So
Well, that's what he's claiming. There are open investigations,
well,
but
there's
not
not
into
an
the Prime Minister.
No,
only to
exactly.
members of the IDF and individual members of the IDF.
Yes, and earlier on he said, the reporter's saying, well, what should the Palestinians be relying on to complain? And he's basically saying internal Israeli investigations
Yes.
with a straight face. But we'll continue with a bit more.
International Criminal Court, as every state in the world has the right to do. But that is not
So where do they go in the meantime?
They are not SOL. I said, first of all, Israel has its own investigations. Second, we have accountability mechanisms here. We have processes that are ongoing to look at Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law. So there are places to look at these questions. It's just in our view, fundamentally not a role of the ICC. And I should say, but remember, we have a jurisdictional complaint here in that we don't believe the ICC has jurisdiction. But if you looked at the statement the Secretary made that I echoed in my opening remarks, that isn't our only problem with the action the prosecutor has taken. We also have a problem that he has short-circuited an investigation and brought this action without waiting to see where these Israeli investigations end up, without completing the trip that he had planned to come to Israel to look into these questions. So it's not just a question of jurisdiction, it's also a question of the way the investigation is being conducted.
So let's just focus on jurisdiction for a second. Who does have jurisdiction here?
So the government of Israel has jurisdiction.
Over the occupied territory.
We have jurisdiction.
Over Gaza, which is not entirely
They
occupied.
have jurisdiction into looking at the actions
Okay,
by their
so the
military personnel.
Palestinians, if they have a complaint, they have to bring it to Israeli courts.
We have jurisdiction, and we
You have
with the
jurisdiction?
use of our equipment.
I'm sorry. How do you have
with the
jurisdiction?
use of our military equipment
Matt,
that we have provided?
How do you have jurisdiction?
If you look at the Leahy law, if you look
No,
at
that's not jurisdiction in a criminal process. That's
not in the
jurisdiction
criminal
over-
process, but it has to do with the determinations that we make and the policies that flow
but
from
that's
it.
not
So,
jurisdiction.
but Matt, long term, you were right that we want to see.
I like that bit where the guy said, have you looked at the Leahy law? And he said straight away, that's nothing to do with the criminal prosecution. So this, American spokesman is trying to say that Israel's got jurisdiction and America's got jurisdiction, but not the ICC. For God's sake, it's shameless, these people. Just shameless.
There's also this idea that Israel is an ally of the US, and Israel is an ally of Israel and nowhere else.
Yes.
The rest are useful tools.
Okay, we've got, let's just get Joe Biden himself. What does Sleepy Joe have to say about this? I think I've got him here somewhere. Maybe I don't. I ran out of room with... Nope, don't have him.
Biden went Burko at the ICJ, and he said that to equate Israel with Hamas is wrong, which I don't disagree with him, but like the journalist just said, he says, where do they go?
And it's not about equating Israel with Hamas. It's simply saying, here are things that we think Netanyahu has done that constitute a type of war crime that's within the ICC jurisdiction, and it seems plausible to us. So, okay, at the same time, he's laid charges against the Hamas, but actually, I'll tell you what the differences are. Let me find those here. I've got them here somewhere, down the bottom here. So, actually, what Putin was accused of, when he was charged by the ICC, Putin was charged with unlawful deportation and transfer of population. So that was the charge against him.
Yeah, it was children, stealing children.
Yeah. Netanyahu is accused of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health, or cruel treatment as a war crime, willful killing or murder as a war crime, intentionally directing attacks against a civilian population as a war crime, extermination and or murder, including in the context of deaths caused by starvation, as a crime against humanity, and persecution as a crime against humanity, and other inhumane acts as crimes against humanity. So the list against Netanyahu is much longer than the one against Putin. And normally starvation isn't one that you would think would make it because it's often hard to prove. Take, for example, in the Ukraine, for example, human assistance is free-flowing across the border. So starvation can't be said to be difficult to pin on the Russians. But Netanyahu and his minister Gallant are in control of the Gaza, and they control what goes in and what comes out effectively. And so this charge of starvation is one that's probably a good one to stick on him because they have full control of what goes into the country. So, yeah, that's that. Let me see. So, yeah, Biden said there's no genocide, equating the two is outrageous. And so that was that. What has been the left's response to this? You've heard a bit from the right, so let's do a little bit of the left. And I think I do have this one. Why am I not seeing all of them? Yeah, here it is. So this is a guy, Mehdi Hassan, who was on debating sort of a pro-Israeli guy on American television on CNN. So this is what the left side of politics would have to say about the situation.
Can I just come in and respond to something Jonathan said a moment ago? He said the only evidence we have of war crimes that's being collected is by UN and by UNRWA, and they're all compromised. That's just not true. I myself have interviewed on my show multiple American doctors who are on the ground in Gaza who have testified to what is going on, what they're seeing with their own lying eyes. I have a friend who is a doctor who went out and served in the European hospital in Gaza. He saw children being brought into the hospital with gunshot wounds to the head. Right? Those are crimes. Those have been witnessed by American citizens, British citizens, French citizens. They're all on the record. To pretend this is just about Hamas or UNRWA is nonsense, right? The evidence is there for anyone who's been to Gaza.
Mehdi is not an international lawyer, and nor are the doctors. It is not up to you to decide what a war crime is. And by the way, I'm not even sure that it's up to the ICC.
I agree. It's up to the chief prosecutor of the ICC, who is a lawyer, a very respected one. And can I finish my point? Just to go back to what Abby said at the start, if they don't want to be charged with war crimes, maybe they shouldn't have done war crimes. Yoav Gallant is being charged with starvation. This is a man, the defense minister of Israel, who said on October the 9th, I'm ordering a total siege of Gaza. No fuel, no electricity, no food. It's closed. Well, maybe he shouldn't have said and done that. Maybe he wouldn't have an arrest warrant out or an application for an arrest warrant against him today if he hadn't done that.
All right, Mehdi and Jonathan,
this man is seriously the
other guy's frustrated there. There you go. I mean, that's the whole point, isn't it? You've got these international doctors and other international people who have been on the ground. You get them into the court, you give evidence, people decide whether they're telling the truth or not and whether the facts amount to the elements of a crime that's been alleged. That's the whole point of it. So, of course, Netanyahu will never get before the ICC, will he?
No.
And so some people would say, what's the point? And Michael Bradley, writing in Crikey, was sort of saying that it's all a bit of a farce. It's in the sense of what's the point? He's never going to get there. But I think it's just super instructive in demonstrating that the USA and others who are crying foul over this ICC indictment have no interest in the international rules-based order at all. Like, it just exposes the hypocrisy and the bullshit of these people saying we want law and order in our international relations when clearly you don't, when there's an international court set up with a fair system and you've just totally denied any possibility that a Westerner or a ally of the Western powers could be brought before this group. It just could not contemplate that Netanyahu has maybe possibly committed anything like what's been alleged. And so when people say, oh, America and all the West or whatever is boo-hoo on China because they're a bunch of rogues and not interested in international rules-based order. Well, neither are you, because Exhibit A is the response to Netanyahu.
Criminal court,
yeah, on something that looks pretty obvious as a fairly plausible case. And they're just not only thumbing their nose and saying it's outrageous, they're threatening the ICC staff and saying, we'll come after you. And they've already passed legislation previously post-Afghanistan, which authorised the US to take military action and go into The Hague and recover any American citizen who might find themselves in front of the ICC. Like, they've already got a law on the books to go in and take back...
Invade another sovereign nation.
Yes, and take back hostages that might have been taken by the ICC.
So they're going to invade the Netherlands, are they? Yeah.
Yeah, already on the books like this. So I think it's really instructive as just to just show, as Caitlin Johnson says, it's useful insofar as it helps disabuse people of the delusional belief that Western powers care one iota about international law. And they make it clear to the whole world that Israel and its powerful Western allies are openly violating the rules they pretend to stand by. So it's a useful counter-narrative against the official imperative narrative, but of course it's not going to actually get any justice. And the US has put in place the Hague Invasion Act, which it did between the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq to ensure that it can use military force to free any military personnel of the US or its allies who wind up detained by the ICC. Now, the actual prosecutor, Karim Khan, and he's the one who's instigated these.
Is he a Pakistani?
I don't know. Quite possibly by that name, you would think.
I just thought because of the name, that's all.
Yeah. He is quoted in an interview as saying this, quote, "I've had some elected leader speak to me and be blunt. This court was built for Africa and thugs like Putin." So that's what Western leaders are telling Karim Khan. Up until this moment, the ICC had never issued arrest warrants against leaders friendly to the West.
Well,
they'd always been African or Putin. Sorry, John?
Nuremberg.
Yes.
There were allegations that some of the firebombing of Dresden, for instance, were war crimes. But there was no interest in prosecuting any of those because that was the side that won.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that would have been the British, wouldn't it? They would have been the courts for the firebombing of Dresden.
Yeah,
British and Americans, I would have thought.
So, yeah, Harris, he was the commander of bomber force, wasn't he? Yeah.
I mean, you could say the same about the atomic bombs, couldn't you? Like, there's strong arguments to show that was unnecessary.
That was completely unnecessary.
Right. What else have we got here? Germany. Spokesman for the German Chancellor confirmed German authorities would arrest Netanyahu if he enters the country. So he won't be going there.
Despite having banned Yanis.
What's that, Joe? What's that?
They banned Yanis from appearing?
Yes.
Farkas?
He was banned from conducting political activity. Yeah, even by Zoom, wasn't he? So is he banned entirely from Germany or just banned from conducting?
I thought he wasn't allowed to even visit.
Yeah, I think you might be right. So Netanyahu won't be there, and unfortunately neither will Yanis Varoufakis. France has expressed support for the ICC. Belgium expressed support. In contrast, the Italian foreign minister said it was unacceptable to equate a government legitimately elected by its people in a democracy with a terrorist organisation that is the cause of everything that is happening in the Middle East. You know, just because you've got a democracy doesn't mean that everything that happens in a democracy is okay. And is it a democracy when a huge proportion of the population, i.e. the Palestinians, aren't allowed to vote? Like, is it a democracy?
Well, I thought they had their own nation.
Well, they'd like to be able to vote in the affairs that affect their land, but they're only entitled to vote on very minor things that they're limited to by the Israeli occupation.
That's not entirely true because the Palestinian Authority did host elections and that type of thing after what's-his-name died. And they
Arafat?
Yes, after Arafat died, they had elections. And that's how this guy got into office. He was elected, but he's refused to hold a new election because he knows he'd be tossed out.
Who are you talking about here? Sorry,
this is the guy that's the head of the Palestinian Authority.
Okay.
Yeah, he controls
in the Gaza or the West Bank?
No, the West Bank.
Right.
The Gaza and everything like that. Hamas took control of that.
Yep.
I'm not sure how they did that, whether it was a coup or whatever it was, but Hamas runs Gaza. The West Bank was run by the Palestinian Authority.
Okay, let me put it this way: the Palestinians were bounced out of the land that they actually
Yeah, I
had,
know.
and then told they couldn't vote on the land that they used to have.
I agree.
So maybe it's not a great democracy.
It's not great, but they've got something. It's not great, but they've got something. And I honestly believe they'd be better off in their own little country than they would be trying to eke out an existence with Israel.
Just going on with more international response, Czech Prime Minister described the allegations against Netanyahu as appalling and completely unacceptable.
Sorry, the putting the allegations to him was appalling, or what he did was appalling?
Yeah. No, the allegations were appalling. Right. Yeah. Let's see. More hypocrisy. But there's a lot of hypocrisy when people were really quick to applaud the ICC when it issued warrants against Putin, and then very hesitant or silent when the ICC issued or wanted to issue warrants against Netanyahu. So someone like Keir Starmer, leader of the UK Labour Party, said in relation to Putin, "I welcome the International Criminal Court's decision to open war crime cases against Vladimir Putin and other senior Russian figures for their barbaric actions in Ukraine." Meanwhile, complete silence from Keir Starmer about Netanyahu. What else we got here? Oh, as you know, dear listener, I read Murdoch Press, so you don't have to. And boy, are they going full on in support of Israel and in basically declaring this obscene what is happening in that Netanyahu's been charged. So it's all through the Murdoch papers. I read the Courier Mail headline, "Leaders slam PM on Israel silence." So because Albanese has said nothing, they are sticking it to him. Some of the other headlines from yesterday's paper: Australia threatened by anti-Jewish hate. Opinion: we as decent Australians have an obvious choice to live cravenly beneath a malevolent cloud of revived and revolting anti-Semitism, or to continue standing tall and proud with our Jewish fellow citizens. So a big push to equate protests against Israeli actions as being anti-Semitic when it's not necessarily the case. John Howard blasted Albo for his failure to repudiate anti-Semitism. Murdoch Press likes to refer to this as anti-Semitism. Rowan Dean from Sky News: on behalf of all decent Australians, allow me to apologise directly to Benjamin Netanyahu for Australian PM Anthony Albanese's disgusting failure to condemn the anti-Semites of the ICC. Yet another in the long line of Labor betrayals of the Jews of Australia and of the world.
For God's sake.
Peter Dutton chastised him, this is Albanese, for tarnishing and damaging our international relationships with like-minded nations when he's not strong enough to stand up alongside President Biden. Quote, this is Peter Dutton, your local member, Joe. "It's an abomination and it needs to be ceased. This action is anti-Semitic and it's against the interests of peace in the Middle East." Charging Netanyahu with the war crime for the actions of Israel in Gaza has nothing to do with anti-Semitism.
Damaging international relationships was joking about waters lapping at the shores of your neighbours, Pacific neighbours.
Yes, as he did, about climate change.
Yes.
And he falsely claimed that the ICC consulted Albanese before applying for the arrest warrants, and Albanese didn't argue back hard enough. And of course, it's complete bullshit. It's not as if the prosecutor consulted the over 100 odd member states and ask them their opinion before.
What a load of nonsense.
Yes, but this is what we're getting from Dutton. Of course, it was John Howard who signed us up to the ICC in the first place. And does anyone want to know Scott Morrison's view on this?
It's going to be mirroring anything that comes out of the US, isn't it?
It is. He says the ICC has totally jumped the shark on this and placed nations like Australia that became members in good faith in an impossible position. Blah, blah, blah. By the way, ScoMo's book, Crikey did an interview with a publishing guru, and he reckons he'll be lucky to sell 100 copies in the US.
Really?
How many over here?
Maybe 1,000, a couple of thousand. He said 100 in the US because nobody in the US knows who he is. He says, lesson one in any market is never publish the autobiography of someone you've never heard of. And I suspect not even Joe Biden knows his name. What did Albanese do? We've made no commitment to arrest Netanyahu, even though the ICJ requires its signatory states to do so in response to a determination by the court. So he said nothing about whether Australia would arrest Netanyahu.
He's got to come over here first.
Yes.
Netanyahu's only been over here for the G20, hasn't he?
Yeah, but there's a whole bunch of countries that have said, if he comes here, we're going to arrest him in advance. So it's kind of, you don't have to wait for him to arrive to say it. Anyway.
Or you could let him come here and then arrest him.
But maybe that's Albanese's cunning plan, is to keep quiet. And I've got a feeling in this environment, Netanyahu's not going anywhere that he doesn't completely trust.
No.
He's not going to leave Israel at this point, is he?
No.
Yeah. Yeah. We're just doing nothing. We're making no comment. Unlike other nations' foreign ministers, Penny Wong has not recalled Australia's ambassador from Tel Aviv. We haven't expelled Israel from Canberra. We haven't offered to arrest Israeli or Hamas leaders. And we're just dithering a little bit or a lot. And she makes the point, this is Alison Broinowski in the John Menadue blog, that 6 decades ago, Australia failed to condemn apartheid in South Africa until Prime Ministers Whitlam, Fraser and Hawke stared down their British and American counterparts and did so shaming them into following suit a few years later. So that's a good point. At some point, decades ago, we used to take the lead on some issues like this, and instead of just kowtowing to British and American opinion, we had our own opinions. So, yeah.
It was back in the day when we actually used to stand up for ourselves.
Yeah. When we were an independent sovereign nation and not just the lapdog of the US. Desmond Tutu, he's dead now.
Yes, he is.
But while he was still alive, he was asked to compare life in apartheid South Africa with conditions in occupied Palestine. And the Nobel laureate, Desmond Tutu's judgment said, life in Palestine is far more brutal and repressive than in apartheid South Africa.
Really? Fuck.
In Australia, don't mention the G word, the genocide word. So now this is probably going back a couple of weeks. Western Australian Senator Fatima Payman talking about the conflict in Gaza. She must be Labor, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, she is.
Yep.
And I gather she's also a Muslim.
Yes, I would think so. She says, instead of advocating for justice, I see our leaders performatively gesture defending the oppressor's right to oppress while gaslighting the global community about the rights of self-defence. My conscience has been uneasy for too long, and I must call this out for what it is. This is a genocide, and we must stop pretending otherwise. I ask our Prime Minister and our fellow parliamentarians, how many international rights laws must Israel break for us to say enough? How many images of bloody limbs of murdered children must we see? She, of course, came in for criticism from all directions, and
She copped it everywhere.
her colleagues in Labor voted with the opposition to pass a motion condemning her remarks. The only opposition were the Greens and Senator Lydia Thorpe. For fuck's sake, I'm so glad I didn't vote for Labor in that last election. God, it's spineless.
It's worse than spineless.
Yes.
Because they're still opening coal mines, aren't they?
Yes. Just...
Although, did you see about the Ukraine has asked for coal?
No, more. Didn't we send them a shipload of coal once?
Apparently 2022 we did.
Yes.
They've asked again.
Right.
Asked 6 months ago, and apparently the government hasn't bothered to reply to them.
Because it doesn't want to offend anybody and doesn't know how to sell a story and just doesn't know how to tell them no. What else have I got here? Just on jurisdiction here, The Economist magazine, my brother Glenn's surprised when I keep saying that The Economist is right-wing, but it is right-wing, Glenn. And anyway,
I don't think it's right-wing. I think it's fairly middle of the road.
Okay, makes note. Discuss right-wing leaning of The Economist. Quote, The Economist, the ICC should prosecute only when states are unwilling or unable to do so genuinely. Israel is a democracy with an independent judiciary. And the response to that from Henry Reynolds, as a historian, says you've got to ask, is the state actively investigating, prosecuting the same persons for the same conduct as the ICC? The answer is no. Therefore, I call bullshit on The Economist and its argument that jurisdiction doesn't apply here. For God's sake. If Israel was running a war crimes inquiry with Netanyahu having to defend himself for charges of starving the people in Gaza, you may have an argument that the ICC should wait and see if that process runs through to its conclusion. But they're not, and they're never going to. Of course they're never going to. Genocide was what that lady mentioned before. By the way, there's a chance this episode might get removed from YouTube for using the G word, apparently. Yeah. So Ben Norton in the Geopolitical Economy Report just says the G word rather than genocide because apparently I think it gets demonetized. Maybe that's what happens, and I don't get any money out of YouTube. Oh, so
right.
That's one of the advantages of being so pathetic. So Wikipedia says genocide is the intent. Joe, you had a theory that Yanis Varoufakis had a definition of genocide, which meant that this whole Gaza story was not genocide. What was the? Can you recall what that argument was?
He was saying that although he wasn't comparing them, that it wasn't a Holocaust in the way that the Jews had been, because they weren't out to wipe out the Palestinians no matter where they are. Whereas the Nazis were out to murder the Jews on the basis of them being Jewish. Right. So he's saying genocides in the past, other genocides have all been about land or resources of some form.
Right.
Whereas the Holocaust was purely about wiping out a race of people.
There we go. Okay, so that didn't mean that he was dispelling the idea that the whole Gaza thing was a genocide. Okay, good. So, believe it or not, in 1948, there was the United Nations Genocide Convention. and it defined genocide as any of 5 acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial or religious group. And these 5 acts were killing members, causing them serious bodily or mental harm, imposing living conditions intended to destroy the group, preventing births, and forcibly transferring children out of the group. Victims are targeted because of their real or perceived membership of a group, not randomly. So to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial or religious group by killing members of the group would be genocide according to that convention. Looks like that's what's happening to me. Now, of course, the repercussions of this flow all over the world. And for the good people of St. Louis, it's not easy, according to Republican Ann Wagner. I mean, you thought things were tough for the people in Gaza, but imagine if your government was really slow in approving arms sales and the economic effect that that could have on your local community. Here we go.
And I want to focus right now very specifically, sir, in particular on the delay of the sale of 6,500 JDAMs. I'm sure you're familiar with them. These are the high-precision GPS-oriented, if you want the least amount of collateral damage in an urban area, you want a JDAM, and we have sent out tons of them to Israel and everywhere else. They also just happen to be made in the St. Louis metropolitan area, in St. Charles, in my district. And since I have not yet received a response to this letter, let me ask you why. Why has the administration failed to move forward with the notification process for the sale of 6,500 JDAMs to Israel? And when will the administration resume the notification process?
Congress right now is still reviewing a JDAM sale that it has.
What we've got here is she's complaining that people can't pay their mortgages, childcare or car payments because the US is not approving arms sales to Israel quickly enough.
Yeah.
That's where we've stooped to in America at this moment. Yeah. Right. That's enough of Gaza. And Scott, bear with us for a little bit because I know you'll like the next bit. The census question.
Yeah.
Now, remember we were talking about that and I thought, I was kind of like, maybe this has gone a little bit too far. But that was because the reporting by these religious groups was misleading. Previously, dear listener, in the last census, it was, what is the person's religion? The first box you could tick was no religion. And then there was a series of options: Catholic, Anglican, Uniting Church, Islam, Buddhism, Presbyterian, Hinduism, Greek Orthodox, Baptist, or other, and you could fill in the other. This time, the reports from the religious groups was that you're going to be asked, does the person have a religion? And the response was no, and then there would be boxes where you could fill in the name of a religion if you have one. But it's more than that. It's got a box for no and a box for yes. And then it says specify religion, which I think is completely fair. So the new question, well, it's not new yet. They're still arguing over it. And, of course, getting more submissions about this than they get about any other question in the census. Does the person have a religion? The answering of this is optional. The first checkbox is no. The second checkbox is yes, and it says specify religion, and there's a bunch of boxes that you could fill in. So, Scott, if that gets up as the question for the census, then that's everything we could possibly have ever hoped for.
Absolutely it is. Yeah. Well, I just don't understand why they didn't give them the option just to tick the box and that sort of stuff. You could have you could have had up to a dozen boxes that they could have ticked. And if they didn't have that, then they could have actually said other. And then they could have written their religion next to the other box if they wanted to. That probably would have been fairer.
Well, is it? If people don't know what their religion is,
well, then they don't have one.
Yeah. So, and it creates a bias in favour of these favoured religions that are sort of listed there. That would be a natural bias that people would be more likely to tick one of those than to fill in some boxes.
They're going to argue that, people will write the name of their religion differently. And that some of their votes will be lost because they'll have been written in a way that isn't recognised by the ABS.
Yes.
I think the ABS is intelligent enough to actually work out what the differences are.
Yes.
Like if someone writes COE, they're going to be assuming that would be Church of England.
But I guess Catholics are going to complain, they just wrote Christian instead of Catholic and we sort of missed out on our number. Well, I say you should have indoctrinated your flock better that they're Catholics.
I've never met a Roman Catholic that's called themselves a Christian. They've always called themselves a Catholic.
I've perhaps chosen a bad example there, but that's the sort of thing that they're going to complain about. Anyway, the Bureau of Statistics is testing that question with focus groups and others, just assessing what sort of responses they get. So, yeah.
One of the biggest complaints was that people who were only nominally of a religion, we will lose the cultural something or other was their claim.
Cultural Catholics?
Well, basically, it wasn't the cultural Catholics. It was, will we losing people who identify with the culture of the religion or whatever?
Yes.
In other words, we want to claim larger numbers than we really have.
Yes. We want to claim cultural adherents who aren't necessarily religious adherents.
Christmas and Easter, and therefore they're Christians.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple more to run through. Scott, how much longer have we got you for?
20 minutes tops. 5 minutes would be good.
When you start snoring.
Have you seen that picture of Gina Reinhardt?
Yeah, and she certainly kicked a massive own goal with her complaining about that.
Yes.
It's one of those things, like she complained about it, she wanted it taken down, and the guys and everything, they took over that enormous Coca-Cola sign at the front of
Times Square.
No, the front of the what the hell's the red light district in King's Cross?
King's Cross,
yeah, they took that over and they put up that picture. So that was a giant middle finger to her.
Well, it's also going to be in Times Square.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yes, there was a GoFundMe type thing. They've raised $30,000. Okay, it's an unflattering picture of her.
No, it's not flattering, but none of the pictures that were produced in that series were flattering.
Correct. It wasn't like he just did a picture of her and no one else.
No.
He did it of a whole bunch of people, and they're all this sort of comic caricature type thing that's quite unflattering for nearly everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been described as the Streisand effect. Have you heard of the Streisand effect?
There was something about that. She wanted, she didn't want anyone in her house or something like that. So she
had some beachside property or something.
She sued, I think, to get. It was listed as some aerial photography happened to catch her house, and she sued to take it down. And because it was a court case, all of the newspapers printed this photograph that was at issue.
Yes,
and I think eventually the court found against her anyway.
Yes.
But it was the point, she was trying to be incognito, and by bringing a trial to it, it brought attention.
Yes.
Well, John Simmons has hit the nail right on the head. No one would have noticed it, and no one would have noticed if she didn't say anything. Exactly.
Yes. Oh, Joe, no, not Joe, sorry. Scott, I do want to get this Taiwanese democracy thing in. I better get this one in I just love this particular video of.
Okay, and this is the guy that stole that piece of legislation to get it out of the House, so it couldn't be voted on.
Yeah, that's the one. It's just, because you are a man who's concerned that we might lose that great democracy in Taiwan.
Yeah, I know, and it doesn't have a particularly long history of being a democracy. Like when they first took it over, it was a military dictatorship, and it took a long time.
Let's just have a quick sneak peek at how democracy works in Taiwan at the moment.
周恩来紧紧抱着资料不放手，还一度跌在椅子上，两人来回拉扯，最后郭国文使尽全力抢下文件，攀比美式足球员的速度，冲出。
So he basically grabs a bill and battles all these other people.
He's been given a job offer by the Lions, I hear.
And I was looking at another picture the other day, or today actually. It was another member of the parliament there, and she's wearing a bicycle helmet and sort of gloves and forearm protectors, like she's about to enter like the roller derby. You remember those old roller derby ones where they would sling somebody through against the evil characters and they'd go around? She was dressed like that, basically sitting in the parliament as one of the parliamentarians, ready to do battle in one of the regular fights that occurs in that glorious democracy in Taiwan.
It's one of those things, like, you know, that house does have a history of getting into fisticuffs. Yes. And that was the Democrats and that sort of stuff that were very pissed off with the Kuomintang, because the Kuomintang bloated their numbers by retaining what they called the old guard, which were the guys that were still representing mainland seats, which they no longer controlled, and they hadn't been elected in years.
Mm.
So these old guard, they never stood down or anything like that, not until they actually finally voted themselves out of office, and that was where you ended up with democracy actually flourishing.
Yes. So it was a strange incident. The member of Taiwan's parliament picked up a bill and ran off with it to prevent it from being passed. And some of the commentators on social media, some of the comments were, "Hey, Phil, can you just email it to all of us?" And fucking Harold just ran off with the hard copy again. And another one said, "Is there a bill about stealing bills?" And imagine the surprise when they just printed out another copy. So that's what's going on there. And legislator Chen Yu-zhen, she wears a bicycle helmet these days so she can do battle with them. That's the democracy in Taiwan. Speaking of democracies, there's a survey done by Latana Democracy Perception Index where people ask people how they feel about their countries as to whether they are democratic or not. And the three most democratic countries based on the feelings of their population were Israel, 83%, Vietnam, 81%, and, drumroll, China on 79%.
Really?
Yes. Third highest country considered that they have a democracy. So least democratic were Hungary, Venezuela, and Iran. So I know, talking to the Chinese homestays, so I know it's anecdotal data, but a lot of Chinese people are very happy with their system of government. If you want to be into politics, join the Communist Party, work your way up through the system. That's how they do it. And culturally, we have to recognise other cultures have a different way of running what they feel is a representative political class.
Yeah, I know that. And it's just one of those things, like, you know, China has a history of it, because one of the things that shocked me was the difference of opinion over Tiananmen Square.
Mm.
Now, this has happened many years ago when my brother brought someone out here from over there, and, you know, he was talking quite freely because he wasn't on Chinese territory. He was out here in Australia. He was just talking about it. And he said that the reason why the Chinese government cracked down so hard is because a number of them remember the what's it called? The revolution, not the actual revolution, but the Cultural Revolution.
Mm.
And they didn't want a repeat of that.
Mm.
So that's why they cracked down so hard on it, because they thought that the students was going to send the country to a second cultural revolution.
Mm.
It's one of those things, and you know, aside from, China's threats to Taiwan and everything else, I don't really have a major problem with them. And their own people, we'll have to agree to disagree over the people that were being the Uyghurs and that sort of thing. But it's just, it doesn't have a real oppressive tone about it to the Han Chinese. The Chinese, who are the majority, seem to get along okay. But anyone that's a little bit different, they don't get along as well as the Han Chinese do.
Anyway, if it's comforting, things are going much better in the American political system.
No, it's not. It's a disaster.
They don't have bicycle helmets on, but given the sort of the cat claws that are unfurled here, maybe they should.
I'd like to know if any of the Democrats on this committee are employing Judge Merchan's daughter.
Please tell me what that has to do with Merrick Garland.
Is she a porn star?
Oh, Goldman. That's right. He's advising. Okay.
He's advising who? What? Do you know what we're here for? You know we're here about AG.
I don't think you know what you're here for.
Well, you the one talking about.
I think your fake eyelashes are messing up.
No, ain't nothing.
Hold on.
Listen.
Order.
Mr. Chairman,
That's beneath
would
even
you please get the order of your committee?
Order.
I do have a point of order, and I would like to move to take down Ms. Green's words. That is absolutely unacceptable. How dare you attack the physical appearance of another person?
Are you?
Oh, it goes on and on and on. John in the chat room, yes, I did get it. The latest episode of PEP has something about some US governor is going to pardon a murderer, I believe.
That just reminded me with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I am thankful for Randy Rainbow.
Randy Rainbow?
Yeah, he's a YouTuber who does takeoffs of Broadway musical numbers that are of a political bent. And he did Hunya a Karen about Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, I think it was.
Right.
I was just seeing her on screen. You have to find Randy Rainbow and get a little lost.
Okay. There we go. John says, I like it. They have passion. Was that about the Americans or the... John says... Yeah, John says he's already pardoned him. It's worth a listen. Yes, PEP is a very good... I haven't got around to PEP this week, but there we go. Well, Scott's ready for bed, and this might be a good stage for us to stop and continue the stuff next week, I think. Next week, we could talk about the Iranian president who died in the helicopter crash.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk
It's
about...
surprising that they haven't accused Israel of that.
Yeah. We can talk about protectionism with tariffs and the chips, and a really interesting little video from a professor at MIT, an expert on chips, basically saying China is unbeatable now when it comes to chips. The helicopter incident where an Australian helicopter was supposedly conducting
enforcement of the
sanction enforcement stuff off North Korea. Renewables, the latest levelized cost of energy report, law of the sea stuff. And Ayame, one of our supporters, wants us to talk about overpopulation, which we will get to at some stage, Ayame. So, yeah, plenty to talk about. Scott, and even the Greens.
What about them?
Wanting to bump up mining royalties.
Yeah, I know they want to bump them up.
Yeah, you'd be happy about that?
Well, yes, I'm quite happy about that.
Another reason to vote Green.
No, I'm not looking forward to it, but I've already agreed to it.
Right, yeah.
And I think that we're going to find out just how bad they're going to be after the state poll in October. Because I think they're actually going to prop up a minority miles government.
If Miles can get enough seats, yeah.
If Miles can't get enough seats, then I think the Labor Party is going to be propped up by the Greens.
Yeah. Look, I've got one other clip. I'll get rid of this clip so it reads, because I've got more for other clips next week. But this one really got me. This is a guy who has just crossed over the Rio Grande and got into America. And let me just see if I can find this one.
Not another Victorian.
This guy's Turkish, and he's just being interviewed as he's crossed over. And here's this.
Did you have to pay a cartel?
Yes.
How much?
Around 10,000.
10,000?
Yes. In fact, the American people is right, completely true. Who come into this country, they don't know. Well, okay, I'm good, but how if they're not good? How they're killer, psychopath, else? No guarantee of that. Why, no security, no security check, no background check.
No security check, no background check. You're worrying about who's crossing the border?
Yes. Of course, me, because I'm like, people are not look normal.
2 seconds into crossing the border.
He's already turned into a xenophobe.
And he's complaining about illegal immigrants. Yeah. And how are they letting these people in here? It's going to stop. Because you don't know who they are. They could be crazy people. Exactly. Talk about whipping the ladder up after you've climbed up. That guy is still... he's still wet, and he's saying, got to stop this illegal immigration.
Give it a generation and you get Suella Braverman.
He doesn't even need a generation. He's crossed the border and he's an instant Republican.
Yeah.
He's assimilated. Greg says, trying to show he can assimilate. He definitely has done that. Yeah. Oh, boy. There we go. That's a good one to finish on. Yeah.
It was very amusing.
All right. Thanks for your comments in the chat room. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will be back next week. Bye for now.
And it's a good night from me.
And it's a good night from him.